Whether in person or online, we begin each Westwood service with an affirmation that the land where we gather has borne witness to thousands of years of Indigenous history, culture, and spirituality, and continues to do so today. Amiskwatsi Waskahikan is the Cree name for Edmonton, which translates into English as Beaver Hills. We are on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional homeland of the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many other Indigenous peoples. Wherever you are at this moment, consider that these lands have been home to diverse nations and complex societies that span across multitudes of generations. While most of us are becoming accustomed to statements of land acknowledgements that respectfully draw attention to the journey of reconciliation and decolonization, there remains much work to do. Every day is an opportunity to remember, to learn, to grow, and to practice the call for land liberation. Good morning and welcome to Westwood Unitarian Congregation Online. We are one of many Unitarian Universalist congregations in Canada and around the world. I bid a special welcome to those of you who are new to Westwood or to Unitarian Universalism. We're happy that you found us, and following this morning's service, we hope everyone can stay for virtual coffee hour to make new connections, catch up with each other, and strengthen our relationships. My name is Lisa Stein, and I'm your service leader this morning. Our speaker is Reverend Ann Barker. Our musicians are Sheila, Killoran, and Rebecca Patterson. Our technical wizards are Ilara, Stefaniuk-Gaudet, and Bill Lee. We are grateful to join with one another in this virtual space to share and be with each other in community. Today's sermon is extra special to both me and Ilara, as we equally contributed to the winning bid for this sermon from Reverend Ann during the 2021 Westwood Fundraising Auction. This auction sermon is based on the book by Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass. I discovered this book when Ilara showed me the cover and emphatically said, "You have to read this book. You'll love it." And of course, they were right, as this book is a compelling narrative that is simultaneously scientific and spiritual. The chapters surround the relationship between humans and the land and the role of Indigenous knowledge in bringing our Western culture back into harmony with nature. What's not for me to love about this book? I sound like a salesperson, but I'm telling you, this is a very special book. For those of you who have read it, you already know its magic and majesty. And for those who have yet to discover its pages, you're in for a real treat. And I hope that Anne's message compels you to order a copy through an independent bookseller and settle in for a beautiful, worthwhile journey.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Do the thing she said. All right, if you have a candle or a chalice nearby, now is the time to bring it forward. Otherwise, we've got you covered here. We find that lighting candles together is one of the ways that we share in ritual and practice, even when we're in separate locations. So this morning for our chalice lighting, I want you to settle in whatever way is comfortable, eyes open or closed. And I want you to imagine your surroundings and what exists in nature, in your surroundings, that is meaningful to you. So it might be a plant that you carefully tend. I can see snow just outside my window, glistening with sunlight on it. My neighbor's giant tree that still lights up with Christmas lights every night. Maybe you walk your dog and you see how the ice and the snow change every single day, depending on what's happening. Maybe you saw the sunrise this morning, or you see the sunlight coming through a window. We come together as people in community, if only for this hour or for a lifetime. And we bring all the gifts that we experience with us. As we come into this worship space this morning, I want us to hold the gifts of nature close in our hearts and minds. I invite you to go on your own journey. That when you're hearing words from my mouth or words from the book, feel free to wander through your own experiences with life and nature and make your own connections in whatever way serves you. So we light our chalice this morning in the spirit of love and abundant connection and the beauty of nature. We're going to start with a story, but rather than me read it to you, it seemed to make better sense to let the author tell it to you. So Ilara, lead us on our way.
We are showered every day with gifts of the earth. Just this morning, as we awoke, we had air to breathe, food to eat, water to drink, the company of sycamores and sparrows and clouds. And yet, we find ourselves harnessed to an economy that relentlessly asks, what more can we take from the earth? This worldview of unbridled exploitation is to me the greatest threat that we face. Even our definitions of sustainability revolve around finding the formula so that we can keep on taking far into the future. But it hasn't always been that way. In the indigenous worldview, it's understood that the work of a human is to discover the answer to the question, what does the earth ask of us? And I really like to think about how does she ask us? She asks us by modeling generosity, for sure. She asks us through the consequences of our failures and through the many examples of our non-human teachers, helping us imagine how it is that we might live. Now this summer, just a few miles up the Hudson from here, I sat watching the sunrise over the river next to a flotilla of nearly 200 canoes and kayaks that were beached for the night. And as I watched the light come over the water, a head poked up and moved directly toward me. When she hit the shallows, her shell rose out of the water, and she came toward me on powerful legs and looked me right in the eye, as if she wanted to ask me something. And why not? She and I, we go back a long time to a story we both remember, part of the creation story told by the first peoples of this place. In the beginning, there was the sky world, where people lived alongside the great tree of life, on whose branches grew all the seeds, medicines, fruits, all the gifts of the plants on a single tree. But one day a great wind came along and felled the tree, and a hole opened where the roots had been. And a beautiful young woman, called in our language Gijkokwe, the sky woman, when she ventured to the edge to look down, she lost her footing. And then when she reached to break her fall, she grabbed a branch from the tree of life. And she fell like a maple seed pirouetting on an autumn breeze. A column of light streamed from the hole in the sky world, marking her path where only darkness had been before. But in that emptiness, there were many. They saw there a small object, a mere dust mote in the beam. And as it grew closer, they could see that it was a woman, arms outstretched, her long black hair billowing behind her as she spiraled toward them. And the geese all nodded at one another. They rose as one from the water in a wave of goose music. And she felt the beat of their wings as they flew beneath and broke her fall. Far from the only home she had ever known, she caught her breath at the embrace of feathers. And so it began. From the beginning of time, we are told that the very first encounter between humans and other beings of the earth was marked by care, by responsibility, borne on the strong wings of geese. And the world at that time was covered entirely by water. And of course, the geese could not hold the woman forever. So they called a council of all of the beings to decide what to do. And as Turtle floated in the water gathering, he offered to let her rest upon his back. And the others understood that she needed land. The deep divers among them had heard of mud down at the bottom of the water. And they agreed to go get some. And one by one, the animals offered their help. The otter, the loon, the sturgeon, the beaver. But the depth, the darkness, and the pressures were too great even for these strongest of swimmers who came up gasping and their heads ringing, until only the little muskrat was left, the weakest diver of all. And he volunteered to go, while the others looked on doubtfully. His small legs flailed as he worked his way downward. He was gone a very long time. They waited and waited, fearing the worst for their relative, until a stream of bubbles arose, and the small, limp body of the muskrat floated upward. But the others noticed that in his paw was tightly clenched, and when they opened his paw, there was a small handful of mud. And Turtle said, "Here, spread this mud across my back, and I will hold it for her." And Sky Woman did as Turtle asked, and then she began to sing. She sang a song of gratitude, and then she began to dance in a circle around the back of the turtle. As her feet caressed the earth, the land grew and grew from that mud on Turtle's back. And then from the branch in her hand, she seeded the earth with green. And so the earth was made, not by one alone, but from the alchemy of two essential elements, gratitude and reciprocity. Together they formed what we know today as Turtle Island. In this creation story, the earth is made of gifts and gratitude, and perhaps that is what the earth continues to ask of us today, gratitude for all that we have been given. Now, gratitude may seem like weak tea, given the desperate challenges that lie before us, but it is powerful medicine, more than a simple thank you. Gratitude pulls us into relationship with other entities, reminding us that our very existence relies on the gifts of others. Gratitude calls us to acknowledge the personhood of all beings, from maple trees to snapping turtles. And gratitude is humbling. It's an antidote to the arrogance of our time. It reminds us that we are just one member of the democracy of species. It reminds us that the earth does not belong to us. Indigenous story traditions are full of cautionary tales about the failure of gratitude. When people forget to honor the gift, the consequences are always material as well as spiritual. The spring dries up, the corn doesn't grow, the animals do not return to those who have neglected gratitude. But the Western storytelling tradition is strangely silent on this matter. And so we find ourselves in an era where we are rightly afraid of the climate that we have created. The next step in our cultural evolution, if we are to persist as a species on this generous planet, is to take to heart Sky Woman's first lesson and be living expressions of gratitude to the earth.
let us sing a song of gratitude together.
The earth is our mother, we must take care of her. The earth is our mother, we must take care of her. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Her sacred ground we walk upon, with every step we take. Her sacred ground we walk upon, with every step we take. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. The earth is our mother, she will take care of us. The earth is our mother, she will take care of us. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. The sky is our father, we will take care of him. The sky is our father, we will take care of him. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. The sea is our sister, we will take care of her. The sea is our sister, we will take care of her. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. The forest is our brother, we will take care of him. The forest is our brother, we will take care of him. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young.
At this time, we pause to reflect on our week. We recall the milestones, joys, concerns, and sorrows, the changes in our lives, and those who need our comfort and healing thoughts. Community is deepened by sharing with each other what is in our hearts. This week, we are inviting people who so desire to share their candles out loud by unmuting yourself, or you may wait for the song and type your candles into the chat afterwards. If you do choose to say your candle aloud, be comforted that this portion of the service will not be uploaded publicly on the recording.
Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul. Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul. Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn
We also recognize and cherish the joys and concerns that remain in our hearts. Please join in reciting the affirmation while remaining on mute. May the light of these candles inspire us to use our power, to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to serve the spirit of truth in loving affection and trusting hope. Our congregation is entirely self-governed and financially supported by the voluntary generosity of our members and friends. Donations to Westwood are accepted and gratefully appreciated at any time by following the instructions on this slide, and also can be found on our webpage. We take this moment to celebrate the programs, events, and activities that we lovingly support throughout the year. Please join Rebecca in singing our offertory song while remaining on mute.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. From together I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
This beautiful painting, Moment in Flight by Bruce King, hangs in Robin Wall Kimmerer's lab. She writes, floating to earth with her handful of seeds and flowers, she looks down on my microscopes and data loggers. It might seem an odd juxtaposition, but to me, she belongs there. As a writer, a scientist, and a carrier of Skywoman's story, I sit at the feet of my elder teachers, listening for their songs. Kimmerer is a botanist, a professor. Sorry, a biologist. I'm getting this wrong. It's botany, right? I'm gonna mess it up right from the start. Compassionate imperfection. A professor, trained in the rigors of the scientific method, warned as a student that she had misunderstood the purpose of botany, that it wasn't about being in relationship with nature or the mystery of why asters and goldenrod are so beautiful together. Rather, it was about rational facts, discovering and determining the makeup of things in that way that we distill the sacred whole down into minuscule parts that no longer carry the full essence of each creation once they have been methodically torn apart. Lisa told you about the auction sermon. It's one of the things I offer when we have a fundraising event, and Lisa and Ilara came to me saying, this is the book, this is it, this is what we want you to talk about. I remember last year it was a different book, and I saw the light shine in their eyes where they're like, we can make you read a book. I am so grateful. Braiding Sweetgrass is one of the most beautiful, inspiring lyrical works of prose I have ever read. So thank you for this precious gift. I understand that it was the highlight of the Freethinkers Book Club last year, and that many of you have read it, and I'm so glad. I'm curious to know how many of you here today have read it. I suspect it will be plenty. If you'll just put a paw up in your window if you've read it. Lots of people in the room, and lots who haven't. Yay! Well, this should speak to all of you, I hope. Our service today will be words, mostly from the author, with pauses for you to journey through your own encounters with nature and spirit and books and life. I'll add some small stories from my experience, stories that drifted into the recesses but were drawn back out by the author's constant invitation to consider our own knowing and our own relationship with the earth, our own stories. Kimmerer has interwoven three essential elements bound up together like a braid of sweetgrass, that when combined reunites the whole of what we need to be meaningful, responsible partners within the interdependent web of all existence. Indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the teaching of plants. After generations of rupture, where Western culture has exploited the land with little thought to inter-responsibility or even care for the future of humanity, the author crafts a cautionary lesson wrapped in her love of the Earth Mother, brought to vivid reality by her remarkable way with words. I want to take a pause for a moment to say, I was watching a program the other day where a person who identifies as non-binary spoke of the Earth Parent. And I invite you, however you experience the world, to swap in the metaphors that work for you. But the imagery of Earth Mother and the words you heard in the song preceding come from another tradition, and I'm not going to alter them in this moment. But feel free to think of siblings and parents if the mother imagery or the father imagery or the sister or brother imagery doesn't speak directly to your heart. Here are Kimmerer's words again. On one side of the world were people whose relationship with the living world was shaped by Sky Woman, who created a garden for the well-being of all. On the other side was another woman with a garden and a tree. But for tasting its fruit, she was banished from the garden and the gates clanged shut behind her. That mother of men was made to wander in the wilderness and earn her bread by the sweat of her brow, not by filling her mouth with the sweet, juicy fruits that bend the branches low. In order to eat, she was instructed to subdue the wilderness into which she was cast. Same species, same earth, different stories. Like creation stories everywhere, cosmologies are a source of identity and orientation to the world. They tell us who we are. We are inevitably shaped by them, no matter how distant they may seem from our consciousness. One story leads to the generous embrace of the living world, the other to banishment. One woman is our ancestral gardener, a co-creator of the good green world that would be the home of her descendants. The other was an exile, just passing through an alien world on a rough road to her real home in heaven. And then they met, the offspring of Sky Woman and the children of Eve, and the land around us bears the scars of that meeting, the echoes of our stories. They say that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, and I can only imagine the conversation between Eve and Sky Woman. Sister, you got the short end of the stick. This is still Kimmerer's words. In the Western tradition, there is a recognized hierarchy of beings with, of course, the human being on the top, the pinnacle of evolution, the darling of creation, and the plants at the bottom. But in native ways of knowing, human people are often referred to as the younger brothers of creation. We say that humans have the least experience with how to live and thus the most to learn. We must look to our teachers among the other species for guidance. Their wisdom is apparent in the way that they live. They teach us by example. They've been on the earth far longer than we have been and have had time to figure things out. They live both above and below ground, joining sky world to the earth. Plants know how to make food and medicine from light and water, then give it away. I like to imagine that when Sky Woman scattered her handful of seeds across Turtle Island, she was sowing sustenance for the body and also for the mind, emotion, and spirit. She was leaving us teachers. The plants can tell us her story. We need to learn to listen. There are so many powerful stories in this one little book. I can see plain as day her grandfather as a hungry boy running home in his underwear, using his pants as a sack to carry the unexpected bounty of pecans. Then the author as a girl learning ceremony from her father on camping trips, how the first cup of coffee was offered to the earth before the adults drank, how to make fire with one match. Then as an adult, spending years pulling muck and overgrowth out of the pond, rehabilitating it so that her daughters would have a place to swim. Learning to split a tree into staves for basket weaving. Planting the 3 sisters, corn, bean, and squash, together in a hill and watching the symbiotic relationship grow into abundant food, abundant life. Each experience teaching her such important life lessons, important planet lessons, tools for survival and for thriving and for understanding deeper truths. She writes of impatience, being in such a hurry that she ate the wild strawberries before they were ripe, and learning to wait a little. When she was young, she thought that change might happen fast. But now she says she is old and has learned that transformation is slow. The commodity economy, these are her words, the commodity economy has been here on Turtle Island for 400 years, eating up the white strawberries and everything else. But people have grown weary of the sour taste in their mouths. A great longing is upon us to live again in a world made of gifts. I can scent it coming, she says, like the fragrance of ripening strawberries rising on the breeze. So let's pause for a moment and reflect on our own experiences, the lessons that shape us, that teach us something important about life. Kimmerer writes constantly about gratitude and reciprocity, about nature's abundance being a gift and that we are a part of that gift economy, that we must also give back and not just take from the earth. Maybe there's a story from the book that you remember that resonates with you. But I wonder if there's a story from your life. Can you reach back into your memories and think of a time when you learned something that shaped you, that taught you an important lesson about how to move through nature, about how to be in right relationship with the earth? The book talks about leaving a gift, tobacco as a symbol of gratitude, and to ask before harvesting a plant or hunting an animal. That plant or the deer will tell you yes or no, and how important it is to listen. What is a lesson you have learned about our relationship with plants or animals or rocks or trees or water? Feel free to type a sentence into the chat or raise a hand if you would like to speak your lesson aloud. Hiking through the desert, searching for water holes that all the animals needed for survival. Leave nothing but tracks when camping. Right. Kimmerer talks about leaving the campsite better than they found it. And they always left a stack of wood for the next people to build their fire. What a treasure that must have been to arrive at the end of a long day, a hike or a paddle, and find the wood ready for your fire. A friend taught me, oops, there it went away. A friend taught me why kill an insect if it was no harm to me. Another friend kept a mouse alive in her garage over the winter and took it out to the field the following spring. Trees have taught me to be welcoming and offer shelter and home to beings along my path. Smokey the Bear was wrong about preventing forest fires. I have a story about potatoes I'm going to tell you. When my children were small, we had a garden and we had harvested all the potatoes, and there were millions of little potatoes. You know how sometimes the garden doesn't work out quite like you imagined. Our garden wizardry was not strong in those days. So we had harvested all the potatoes and we had spread them out on tarps on the lawn to dry before we stored them for the winter. And the kids were small, and there were neighborhood kids and our kids playing in the fenced yard. And all of a sudden I heard this thwack, thwack, thwack sound. And it turned out that they found some old hockey sticks in the alley, and they were playing potato hockey in the backyard. And you know that moment when you look at your children and you think their eyes are lit up with joy, and at the same time they are doing something not okay, like, you know, the soap bubbles in the kitchen or whatever. And you think, I don't want to interrupt their joy, but there's a lesson to be shared here. And to make a long story short, we gathered all the damaged potatoes and brought them into the house and talked about how when you break the potato, you can't store it anymore because it's going to spoil. And their eyes got huge like saucers, like they had, you know, we'd spent all this time growing these potatoes and now they had broken them. But then we said, if we're not going to waste this, then what we need to do is we need to find a way to use them before they spoil. And those little kids sat around the kitchen table chopping dozens and dozens of tiny potatoes into French fries. And we baked sheet after sheet of French fries. And so it didn't ever spoil the joy of the moment. They didn't feel punished for making this mistake, but they have never forgotten that you do not play hockey with potatoes. Robin Wall Kimmerer is a mother, scientist, decorated professor, and enrolled member of the citizen Potawatomi Nation. She considers writing to be one of her gifts back to the earth, to share what she has learned in hope of shifting our global consumptive ways of being. She shares with tender heartbreak the stories of her people being removed from their homeland, moved and moved and moved again, because the settlers and developers wanted the bountiful land that her people were sharing. And of the struggle to try to learn her indigenous language, Potawatomi, when there were only 9 original speakers left in the world. I could feel her embarrassment when her college professor told her that if she wanted to learn about beauty, she should go to art school. And the frustration it must have been to learn to be a Western model scientist, where the questions were, what is it and how does it work? Reductionist, mechanistic, and strictly objective, she says. When she wanted to ask the plants, who are you? What can you tell us? My inclination was to see relationships, she writes, to seek the threads that connect the world, to join instead of divide. But science is rigorous in separating the observer from the observed, and the observed from the observer. Why 2 flowers are beautiful together would violate the division necessary for objectivity. She was a strong student, learned the ways of proper science, and built a successful career as a botanist and a professor. And the ways of her people kept calling her. She writes, Native scholar Greg Cadet has written that in Indigenous ways of knowing, we understand and think only when we understand it with all, sorry, that's a misprint. We understand a thing only when we understand it with all 4 aspects of our being: mind, body, emotion, and spirit. I came to understand quite sharply when I began my training as a scientist that science privileges only 1, maybe 2 of these ways of knowing, mind and body. As a young person wanting to know everything about plants, I did not question this, but it's a whole human being who finds the beautiful path. There was a time when I teetered precariously with an awkward foot in each of 2 worlds, the scientific and the indigenous. But then I learned to fly, or at least try. It was the bees that showed me how to move between different flowers, to drink the nectar and gather pollen from both. It is this dance of cross-pollination that can produce a new species of knowledge, a new way of being in the world. After all, there aren't 2 worlds. There is just one good green earth. So I invite you to reflect again. on the times in your life where there has been a disconnect, when you've been told that you were wrong, or that your way of interacting with the world was not right or proper or suitable. Maybe you were a student who learned differently, or you loved music in a family of athletes, or you were quiet in a loud, competitive crowd. Our identities exist at our essence, and the world often asks us to set them aside, to be some other way, to speak up or to keep quiet, to believe something that you just can't carry, or to ignore your desires because they don't suit your group. Kimmerer was torn between her Indigenous ways of relating to nature, to ask permission, to leave an offering, to be gentle and not take more than she needed, to think of the future and the legacy she was leaving. When science wanted her, at first anyway, to be rational and empirical and not at all relational. So we'll pause a minute to reflect on times when we have been torn between worldviews or ways of being. And you are welcome to share in the chat or aloud. A time when you've been torn between worlds or ways of being. In the chat, we have, every time I go to the hospital, I am disconnected as a whole being and treated like a broken body. As a high school student, I desperately wanted to train as a hairdresser. And my father told me I was too smart for that and there was no money in it. Turns out there's lots of smart hairdressers and there's money to be had. But I didn't do it because I was encouraged into a different space. And it was years later when I realized that to move on, I needed to take the training, even though I never intended to do that as my source of income, just to undo that story that was stuck in my heart. When I begged my father not to break those remaining 5 acres of prairie wool, he said, I will do it because I can. I said, what difference is 6,000 acres or 6,005? In my profession, when we're asked to separate each piece out from the whole, it's not how the earth works. Between masculine and feminine, intellect, intuition. Thank you. Kimmerer learned to braid the 3 paths together, to reshape her work over time, to incorporate Indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the teachings of plants. That's an important lesson for me. I'm a bit stubborn, and I don't like to be wrong or seen as wrong. So I can remember times when I've left something behind that mattered to me so that I could fit into a new role or program or relationship. And I remember the way it hurts to cleave yourself apart like that. One of the great gifts of this book is that model of uniting all of the important parts of her existence to find her true whole. Another important lesson is how she helps students to see the reciprocal nature of our relationships to the earth. It goes like this. I once sat in a graduate writing workshop on relationships to the land. The students all demonstrated a deep respect and affection for nature. They said that nature was the place where they experienced the greatest sense of belonging and well-being. They professed without reservation that they loved the earth. And then I asked them, do you think that the earth loves you back? No one was willing to answer that. It was as if I had brought a 2-headed porcupine into the classroom. Unexpected, prickly. They backed slowly away. Here was a room full of writers passionately wallowing in unrequited love of nature. So I made it hypothetical and asked, What do you suppose would happen if people believed this crazy notion that the earth loved them back? The floodgates opened. They all wanted to talk at once. We were suddenly off the deep end, heading for world peace and perfect harmony. One student summed it up: you wouldn't harm what gives you love. Knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. So I ask you one final reflection, to think about a time when you were in a reciprocal relationship with the earth, when you loved it and it loved you back. There's excellent research that talks about how just setting a foot into a forested area can impact our mental health and well-being. Breathing in the scent of living, growing, decomposing, changing life. Was there a time you sat in a field among the tall stalks, or rolled in the grass and then lay there staring up at the shape-shifting clouds? What about the campfire or the riverbank or the ocean? Is there a place you go where you feel more whole, more yourself? Some of you will have heard me talk about tomato babies during the first spring of the pandemic, and how when we were so full of not knowing and fear and uncertainty, planting the tomato seeds in the little pots was an act of hope for the future. And when those little hairy muffins started coming up out of the dirt, it was a sign from nature that life continues. And it helped me to believe that we would still be here long enough to harvest the tomatoes and to can them and to eat them. There we go. Sitting in an aspen grove and appreciating the music and dance of the leaves in the wind. Don't we all have our special trees? For me, it's cedar is my baby. Every fall when the beets are ready and they are there to feed us, and I harvest them to make borscht and beet rolls, and I feel fed and connected to my ancestors. Sitting on the riverbank playing my drum with ducks swimming over and staying to listen. Sitting in the branches of the tamarack trees down the block. Walking near Fort Edmonton in summer and snacking on ripe Saskatoon berries that are along the way. When Atticus, our cat, comes to sit and purr on my belly when I'm having trouble sleeping. There is so much more we could talk about. Learning her language and discovering the grammar of animacy, that in Potawatomi, nouns are only for dead things, that living things are verbs. To be a bay, to be an apple, and that even the rocks are beings. Something is an it if it has no life force, like plastic, for instance. What it is to be a mother, as a woman with 2 daughters, trying to incorporate and emulate the lessons of the Earth Mother in her parenting. The importance of ceremony for remembering, and how we all have our own ceremonies, even if we don't remember them. How we grow ceremony at home, and it creates a home. Kimmerer writes, ceremonies transcend the boundaries of the individual and resonate beyond the human realm. These acts of resonance, of reverence, are powerfully pragmatic. They are ceremonies that magnify life. Reading her words and wandering through her memories, I'm reminded of a time when I lived in the rainforest, when my children were small and bright red salmon were running. The tall trees and the sky were full of eagles coming to clutch the easy prey in those crowded waterways, and how sometimes their ambition was greater than their strength, and the heavy salmon would rip loose from their talons and land on our path. I want to tell you about how huge those salmon were and how huge those eagles were, and how the shiver ran through me when I realized that they could lift little defenseless Casey as easily as they could lift one of those fish. How small we really were in the grand scheme of things. That's the beauty of a gifted author who braids the sweetgrass tales in ways that you take you with her into her life, but also deeper into your own. That is the gift that each of us carries with our gifts and our inspirations, that when we share the things that light us up, we bring others along with us. It is holy work. I realize, ironically, that we've gotten this far and I haven't really even spoken about sweetgrass yet. About the remarkable discovery that the reason for the declining of patches of wild sweetgrass was not, like the scientists thought, because of damage when they were harvested, but was rather because of neglect. That the grass thrived when they were in relationship with respectful pickers and waned when they were left alone. That in so many ways, humans are factored into the stewardship, the relationship with the growing beings. That the black ash thrived near the basket makers. That this is not really surprising when we think about it, but how important it is to be reminded of these truths. Really, I want to sit around a fire and read one another this book, and then read it together again. So thank you, Lisa and Ilara, for this wonderful gift. I wanted to read it, but it wasn't ever making it to the top of the pile. And I am so grateful and so inspired. I'll close with the author's words again about how we are truly responsible to one another if any of us are to thrive or even survive. We are all bound by a covenant of reciprocity. Plant breath for animal breath, winter and summer, predator and prey, grass and fire, night and day, living and dying. Water knows this. Clouds know this. Soil and rocks know they are dancing in a continuous giveaway of making, unmaking, and making again the earth. Our elders say that ceremony is the way we can remember to remember. On the dance of the giveaway, in the dance of the giveaway, remember that the earth is a gift that we must pass on just as it came to us. When we forget, the dances will need to be for mourning, for the passing of the polar bears, the silence of cranes, for the death of rivers, and the memory of snow. When I close my eyes and wait for my heartbeat to match the drum, I envision people recognizing, for perhaps the first time, the dazzling gifts of the world, seeing them with new eyes just as they teeter on the cusp of undoing. Maybe just in time, or maybe too late. Spread on the grass, green over brown, they will honor at last the giveaway from Mother Earth. Blankets of moss, robes of feathers, baskets of corn, and vials of healing herbs. Silver salmon, agate beaches, sand dunes. Thunderheads and snowdrifts, cords of wood and herds of elk. Tulips, potatoes, luna moths, and snow geese. and berries. More than anything, I want to hear a great song of thanks rise on the wind. I think that song might save us. And then as the drum begins, we will dance, wearing regalia in celebration of a living earth, a waving fringe of tall grass prairie, a whirl of butterfly shawls, with nodding plumes of egrets, jeweled with the glitter of a phosphorescent wave. When the song pauses for the honor beats, we'll hold high our gifts and ululate their praises, a shining fish, a branch of blossoms, and a starlit night. The moral covenant of reciprocity calls us to honor our responsibilities for all that we have been given, for all that we have taken. It's our turn now, long overdue. Let us hold a giveaway for Mother Earth, spread our blankets out for her, and pile them high with gifts of our own making. Imagine the books, the paintings, the poems, the clever machines, the compassionate acts, the transcendent ideas, the perfect tools. The fierce defense of all that has been given, gifts of mind, hands, heart, voice, and vision, all offered up on behalf of the earth. Whatever our gift, we are called to give it and to dance for the renewal of the world in return for the privilege of breath. Blessed be, and amen. The moral covenant of reciprocity calls us to honor our responsibilities for all that we have been given, for all that we have taken. It is our turn now, long overdue. Let us hold a giveaway for Mother Earth, spread our blankets out for her, and pile them high with gifts of our own making. Imagine the books, the paintings, the poems, the clever machines, the compassionate acts, the transcendent ideas, the perfect tools. The fierce defense of all that has been given. Gifts of mind, hands, heart, voice, and vision, all offered up on behalf of the earth. Whatever our gift, we are called to give it and dance for the renewal of the world in return for the privilege of breath. May it be so. Now, we're going to sing this song again. Thank you, Sheila. I was so glad when I saw you were our musician today because I knew this song lives in your heart.
The earth is our mother, we must take care of her. The earth is our mother, we must take care of her. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Her sacred ground we walk upon, with every step we take. Her sacred ground we walk upon, with every step we take. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. The earth is our mother, she will take care of us. The earth is our mother, she will take care of us. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. The sky is our father, we will take care of him. The sky is our father, we will take care of him. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. The sea is our sister, we will take care of her. The sea is our sister, we will take care of her. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. The forest is our brother, we will take care of him. The forest is our brother, we will take care of him. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young. Hey, younger, oh, younger, hey, young, young.
Thank you so much for that, Anne. That was just perfection. I really appreciate it. And now we are going to break for our coffee hour. We have a breakout room that you can join or stay in the center. And then you can join us next Sunday when Reverend Ann will be speaking on interdependence. And thank you everybody for coming this morning and hearing about this remarkable book. And if you haven't read it or if you want to read it again, blessings. Thanks everyone.
It does exist in the library, both audio and print versions. So